Memorial Day weekend holiday. The reason that this holiday is on the calendar is to remember the fallen. I'm not real big on cliche. It shouldn't be a celebration. It should be a reflection. My son and I both share several common interests. But given that it's Memorial Day and I served and he is currently serving, it seems fitting to have some sort of a message. And we both usually enjoy watching the Indy 500. I also like NASCAR. Basically, I like anything that has spark plugs and emits carbon monoxide. I don't know what that has to do with Memorial Day. I came out here to try to make my own version of a Memorial Day salute to those that have served and those that are currently serving, and even to those that will in the future serve. And that we don't get overrun with Chi-Coms or Russians or Ukrainians or Mexicans. But given that this holiday takes its history back to the Civil War, I don't consider it a holiday. I mean, why would you celebrate war? Commemorating, respecting, I have no problem with that. To create a holiday that in essence, at its core, consistently bring into the view of the average citizen that freedom is not free. There's a price to be paid quite often. And it may not necessarily be on a battlefield. I spent most of my time on a gray ship, haze gray and underway. Today's video will be mostly about my personal opinion about Memorial Day as one who served and as one who has a child that is currently serving, and as one whose father served and many of my uncles served. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a tradition in this family, almost an accidental tradition. My grandfather had a couple of brothers that served. My grandfather himself did not. He was kind of in that in-betwixt. Actually, he was too young for World War I and too old for World War II. I have this sinking feeling that we're probably headed towards some sort of conflict that is beyond the scope of our current comprehension. And sadly, it's mostly due to people that aren't aware of history. And this point was brought home to me a few days ago. I have a friend that I follow on Facebook that is a retired teacher. Her particular, what's the word I'm looking for? Her particular calling was not history. It had to do with math, and in later years, she got involved with computer science. But she made a observation on Facebook the other day regarding civil rights movement in Mississippi back in the early 60s. She was watching a documentary and she said, "Oh, I was totally unaware that this was occurring in my lifetime." For instance, that she was in 8th grade at the time that this occurred. I just made the simple comment that, if we don't know our history, then we're doomed to repeat it. There's an individual who graduated high school, went to college, got a teaching certificate, taught to the point where she could retire from teaching, sees a documentary several years after retiring, and was unaware of the civil rights movement in the early 60s. I find that interesting. I think interesting is a good word. I find it also appalling because she's an individual who grew up in the 60s, who came of age in the late 60s, who went to college in the 70s, and was unaware of the civil rights movement of the 60s in regards to Mississippi and Medgar. I mean, as a child, I grew up watching Walter Cronkite giving us the daily body count on the Vietnam War. Hell, I remember when Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King were shot, and how that everybody felt around me. I know most of you won't believe this, but I had just turned 4 when JFK was assassinated. The thing I recall from that day was standing in the kitchen and just the solemn attitude of everybody in the kitchen that were all adults. My grandfather, my grandmother, everybody kind of had their heads down and eyes looking at the floor. And, as a 4-year-old, I'm sitting there, I don't understand assassination of a president or whatever, but I remember their attitude about it. It sort of hurts me to think that somebody that went through years of school, taught years of school, and years after they retire from teaching years of school, see a documentary and are awakened by something that happened 50 years ago, and is amazed that it happened in their lifetime when they would have been in 8th grade. It makes me wonder, like going forward, the people who are currently in 8th grade today, a child in 8th grade today, and they go through high school, graduate, go to college, get a teaching certificate, teach school for 25, 30 years, whatever length of time it takes to retire for a few years, see a documentary about the Maidan massacre at the Maidan Square in Kiev, Ukraine, and think, I don't recall that even happening. Say 50 years from now, the technology that will be available. Will the fact that Hitler slaughtered over 6 million Jews, that the civil rights movement occurred in the 60s, that we had a president assassinated 50 years from now, will that even be in the database? Will anybody care? It seems today, 50 years on from the civil rights movement of the 60s, that people who call themselves teachers were unaware that occurred. How does that happen? How do you work in the milieu of teaching? I don't care what the subject is. If you're teaching English, if you're teaching math, it doesn't matter. You hang out in the teacher's lounge and you have conversations with other teachers. None of that bleeds over. Certainly there would have had to have been a conversation at some point in the teacher's lounge between a history teacher or an English teacher talking about the subject matter of the day. That the history teachers would be talking about the civil rights movement. That they would be talking about the assassination of a president or the assassination of civil rights activists in Mississippi in the 60s. I mean, yeah, that's 50 years ago, but it's a kind of history that's important to know. But the problem is that people today don't know this history. They're doomed to repeat it. You have these blowhards and talking heads today on both sides of the fence, yammering on endlessly, and is keeping this other race down. We've got a president that's of color, besides white, besides Caucasian, and yet we still go on about racial equality and whatever. Everything gets so politicized that the Democrats, the Republicans are waging a war on women, and the Republicans are talking about how the Democrats amnesty for all the illegals. It's just baffling to me. In the course of human existence, at least since the Renaissance, we've kept pretty copious records of historical events and characters that involved themselves in world history and involved themselves in the direction that the world went for a particular period of time. And yet we find ourselves today, World War I, World War II. What does that mean to the average citizen? The average citizen, the average citizen couldn't tell you who their current congressman or senator are, much less what the dates were of a particular war, or who were the generals of note, or who started the thing to begin with. World War I was basically started by some second-rate backwater prince getting assassinated in some backwater town, Sarajevo of all places. And so this Prince Ferdinand guy who cares? He's some Austrian, Hungarian nobility or whatever. He gets knocked off by some Serbian anarchist in Sarajevo, and pretty soon the whole world's at war. And who knows what the catalyst is going to be for the next world war. The crap that's going on today between our president and the president of Russia, and the rhetoric that's being tossed back and forth and whatever, and the drum beating that's going on. For what good purpose? At the end of the day, who stands to gain? None of us. People taking sides and going off and shooting each other. Why? Why do we develop weapons to just annihilate our fellow human being for no good reason? Because we can? Because we think that our ideology and our way of life is better than the next guy? There's over two opposing sides with different viewpoints about their religion or what hat to wear or what clothes to wear on any given day or what color or, you walk this way down the street. I mean, for God's sake, it's not about like, can we all just get along? But really, at the end of the day, can we just kind of like decide that there's got to be a better option than just killing each other? Why do we have to have a Memorial Day? Like, two people got mad at each other, decided that their countries needed to, have a throwdown and a smackdown and develop weapons and just annihilate one another for no good apparent reason. When you look back at the start of the thing, the whole thing could have been averted if the two guys and maybe a disinterested third party went over in some dark corner room somewhere, had a couple of snifters of brandy and a cigar, and just sat down and talked about the stuff. And then we wouldn't have had hundreds of thousands of lives lost. We wouldn't have Memorial Day weekends because we're remembering the fallen, because there wouldn't be any fallen. I'm not some bleeding heart left-leaning liberal that thinks Karl Marx is the greatest thing that ever, wrote something on a piece of paper. I mean, at the end of the day, Karl Marx was a newspaper editor, for God's sakes, and he writes a manifesto. And, we've got to just listen to this guy. But I've got a friend on Facebook, you're a retired teacher that never heard of the civil rights movement, for God's sakes. But I plan on enjoying the weekend. I still have to work tomorrow, but like I said, for all the vets out there, thank you for your service. For all the ones currently serving, keep a vigilant, watchful eye. Hopefully the caca won't hit the fan on your watch. This is probably the most rambling video I think I've ever made. And I'm not sure that I'll even get 2 minutes worth of actual footage that's usable. I'll do my best. Thank you for watching, and please tune in again.